Hello everyone, this is Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore. I'd like to welcome you to the MuseScore Café. So this is, I'm going to get in the habit of saying the date. It's March 30th, 2022, and this is my regular weekly series where we talk about some aspect of making music using MuseScore. So before I go on, I want to as always, call your attention to the pinned link at the top of the chat, and that's where the link is to the Mastering MuseScore School, where I offer my complete online course for learning MuseScore, as well as other courses for learning music theory, basic theory, harmony, chord progressions, counterpoint, jazz piano. Got lots of stuff there to take advantage of. And also you can access the Mastering MuseScore community there, which is free to join and participate in. So this week's topic is a continuation of last week. I want to kind of just finish our tour of the MuseScore 3 interface, opening all these little dialog boxes and windows that maybe you don't see every day. And I just want to show you what they're all good for. So I need to check in. I need to turn off my phone because my phone is ringing. So are things is things okay? Dave's saying you've got some sort of issue, but you found the chat. So okay, yeah, YouTube is YouTube, and I unfortunately have no control over that. Colleen, my Mingus gig, yes, I played on a gig this weekend doing a tribute to Charles Mingus. It was a lot of fun. Went great. Thanks for asking. Okay, so I'm going to continue where I left off, but with a couple little modifications. The first thing that I want to do, and I do this every week in the cafe, and maybe you notice and maybe you don't, is the very first thing I do is I fiddle with the play panel here. So let me undock the play panel so you can see it a little better. The play panel is something you would normally access from the View menu. View, Play panel. And I kind of skipped over that last time because it was already open and I didn't really talk about it, but I want to just talk about it briefly here. And I'll also eventually come back and talk about the palettes and inspector, which are also usually open. So the play panel is this optional window, and you may notice I said dock. Yes, these panels are all dockable. So if I drag it over to the corner of the side here, you can see now it's docked onto the side along with the palettes, or you can drag it away. If you double click the title bar, it will then redock itself to whatever the last place you had it. Where I usually keep it is docked to the bottom. Oh, notice when I dragged it to the side, see how the whole side highlighted? That means it's going to become a tab. So when I release now, you'll see there's a play panel tab and an inspector tab. And that's another way you can arrange these windows. So that works for the palettes, the inspector, the play panel, the mixer. I forget if there's other windows that are that you can undock and tab in those ways, and maybe we'll discover it if we as we move along. So let me drag away the play panel again, and now it's too big. I make it as small as I reasonably can here. So the play panel is just a place where you get some controls over playback. And a lot of these controls are duplicated in the toolbar there. We have the start and stop, but we get a control over tempo and we get control over volume. And that's all I use it for. There's some other things you can do also, but I use it so that while I'm playing my theme music, I can turn the volume down. And so I always turn it down before I start. And then once I'm done with my introduction, I then double click this control to return it to the default volume, -40. It's a technical -40 decibel something. Decibels below nominal or something. I forget the technical way all that works. But anyhow, if you move a slider in MuseScore, double clicking it returns it to whatever its default value is. So that's always the first thing that I do. And now I will redock it down back in. I don't want it tabbed. I want it down below. So I put it down below, and now it's tabbed down there. And so you normally don't really see it because my face is covering most of it up, but you get the idea. So I am monitoring the chat here. So feel free to be like, I'm going to run through a bunch of windows quickly like I did last week. And if there's ones that you want to see more information about, we'll come back to them as time permits. And Dave, I saw your question about the timeline. And yeah, there's been a few discussions, both ones that you started and a couple others started by other people on Facebook and on the forums about the timeline. So I am going to come back and talk about that in a little more detail. That's one that I know I'm going to come back to. All right, so where I left off last time was I talked about loading and saving styles. Now we're going to come to the Tools menu. So I'm going to actually load up a different score just to have something else to play with. And I will use Trevor's Ukrainian Rhapsody here. Actually, we'll have this as a piano score. So he has this piece in the key of D minor. Right, nice little piece, love it. More than little, actually. I want to. If I decide I want to not play that in D minor, I want to play it in E minor for whatever reason. Maybe because we've decided to put some words to it and someone's going to sing it and D minor is just a little too low for them. We can select the score and then go to Tools, Transpose, and now you get these options for transposing. You can transpose either by directly selecting what key you want to go to, G major / E minor here. You can also, and then when you do that, you can say if you want it to pick the closest, like E minor, the closest to go up a step. But if you want it to definitely go down a seventh, you could click the down box there. And you can also select what interval you want to transpose by. If you don't want to just pick a new key, but you want to say, I want it to go up a major third. Or if you want to transpose diatonically, you want to actually change the music to keep in the key of 1 flats, but move everything up a third, there's that option. And then there's options to control whether chord symbols transpose, and also whether or not it uses double flats or double sharps, or whether it respells things to avoid that. That's what the transpose dialog is for. And I did it by selecting the entire score. But a lot of the things in this Tools menu work on a selection. So if I only want to select, say, the first four bars here, and then say Tools, Transpose, and transpose those to E minor, you'll see only those first 4 bars got transposed, and then it's back. Oh, I also only selected the top staff. Look at that. I didn't mean to do that. I meant to actually select across both staves. So let's do that now. Select across both staves. I wouldn't recommend transposing just one staff like that. If you're trying to do that, probably you're really meaning to have just chosen a transposing instrument, and that's something else entirely. So here's me transposing now the first 4 bars. So I've transposed the first 4 bars. It's from E minor to back to D minor. And when it did that, it didn't reinsert a key signature change at the end. You'll have to do that manually. All right, see a couple other questions here. The play panel. So if you're having trouble getting it to dock, you have to make sure you wait for it. Like, look at what's happening as I drag this. I'll drag it to the top this time. Notice that as I drag up to this location, at some point, the whole inspector moved down to make room for it, and the background area behind it turned blue. See how the background behind it turned blue? That's your cue that it has reached the docking area. So you can't just, if you just release here, you just release here. You have to actually wait until you see the docking area appear. And, sometimes it can be a little tricky depending on, like for me, getting that drag operation to work just so with my touchpad is a little finicky. But eventually it happens, and I get that blue background and the inspector pushing itself up to make room. So you just have to kind of fiddle with it to get it to work. some trial and error may be required. So anyhow, that's transpose. The next dialog box that I see, I'm looking for, again, Windows, because that's what I'm doing here, is actually, this isn't a dialog, but it is a thing. Image capture. I didn't even know this was in the tools menu. That might be new. I know it is always on the toolbar, but let's do this for a second. If I pick image capture, it's not a dialog box, but it's a gray rectangle, right? This gray rectangle allows me to select a little chunk of music, and then I can drag it. And what I'm doing is I'm not really selecting the music. I'm just going to capture an image. If I now right click this rectangle, I'm going to get a menu with some more options here. And this will let me save that as an image. And by print mode versus screenshot mode, that's basically, do invisible items still show up? In print mode, no, they don't. In screenshot mode, yes, they do. And there's also a dialog here where you can select what resolution you want that output to be if you save as a PNG file as opposed to SVG, which is the other format. And then you can also, from within here, just copy, and Control-C is copy. So now I've just copied that image. I didn't bother saving it, and now I can just paste that image. I can click somewhere where I want it to paste here. Oh, I need to hit Escape to leave image capture mode, and then click over here and Control-V, and now I've got that image pasted to that note. And notice that that image is kind of like allocating extra space between the staves to make room for it. If you don't want that, you can untick automatic placement, and now the image will happily collide with other things. So depending on what you're trying to use that image for, that's useful. And you can paste it into other programs. That's really what it's mostly used for, is pasting into a word processor. So anyhow, image capture, that's a thing also. And you can access that from the toolbar or from the tools menu. So the next things that I want to show you are in the plugins menu, and I'm kind of excited to do this because, as I've been describing, this is a relatively new computer. I got it a few weeks ago, and apparently I haven't actually installed any plugins on this computer yet, because I basically only use it for the demos that I do here. So I want to show you the process of using the plugin manager. So under the tools, under the plugins menu, you see plugin manager. And when you open the plugin manager, yes, it's taking its time to appear. It's going to be, did it appear and go somewhere off screen? That's possible. Or did it just lock up and do some sort of weird freeze up thing? Oh, there it is. Okay. Don't know what happened, but there it is. So the plugin manager will show you a list of all the plugins that you have downloaded. I have downloaded all those plugins already, not on this computer, but on my other computer. But because I have set up my system, I mostly use Chromebooks, as you know. I also have a Windows computer, and I've set them all up to share the same Google Drive folder. So if I go to my Google Drive folder here and open MuseScore 3, so here are my scores here, my scores folder, and because it's on Google Drive, it's all shared between all my computers. But my plugins folder also is shared between all my computers. So these are all the plugins that I previously downloaded on my other computer. So I downloaded them. They're here in my plugins folder. So they're available to me here, but I need to actually activate them. So all I need to do is, in the plugin manager, put a check mark by the ones that I want to activate, and add courtesy accidentals. Love that one. The Appoggiatura and Articulate, Batch Convert. Some of these I use all the time. Check harmony rules, check parallel. A lot of the ones that are here basically are here because I use them, so I'm going to put a check mark by a lot of them. Some of them are only here because I've used them for demonstration purposes and I don't need to normally see them. But I'm going to go ahead and put check marks by a whole bunch of these things while I'm in here. And then we'll see. Might as well put in that one. Might as well put, yeah, a lot of these are useful. Some of them I don't remember what they even are, to be honest. Remove courtesy accidentals. That's definitely good. Reset dialogues. These are all useful plugins. Oh, and someone has suggested that I maybe dedicate. I did one cafe episode on my favorite plugins, but there's all sorts of plugins that I've never really looked at, and maybe I'll start occasionally dedicating cafe episodes to other plugins, just so we can take a look at some other plugins. Tempo changes, that one's awesome. Tempo stretch, that lets you do retards and things like that. Traditional beaming is nice. Triller, I think, is good. All right. Anyhow, check marks by all the plugins that I want to install. And now I press OK. And now when I go to the plugins menu, there they all are. Now, here's the thing I'm going to recommend. Whenever I make changes like that, those changes don't get remembered if the system crashes. Not that I'm expecting a crash, but you never know, right? So what I want to do is I'm actually going to close MuseScore now and then just reopen it. Okay, I'm going to close MuseScore, discard those changes, and reopen it. And when I do this, now when I closed MuseScore, it remembered my changes. Now I don't have to worry about whether a crash is going to cause it to forget all those changes I just made. So that's what I recommend there. Oh, Peter, you're asking about resize to A and resize to B in the image capture. Yes, I actually skipped over one little bit. So the idea is that you can have some preset sizes. Like if you know that this size rectangle that I just created is one that you're going to use a lot, we use this one here that says set standard size. Set size A. It's not an actual separate dialog box, but now set size A. So now, anytime I come to image capture mode, oops, wrong button, it remembered that one. But if I now stretch this to a different size and say, oh no, I want size A back, now I can right click it and say resize to A, and it will go back to that save size. So basically you can set for preset rectangle sizes, which is useful if you're trying to get a consistent size of your images when pasting into a Word document. So yeah, good question there. And there you go. That's the answer. Okay, so from where do I get the plugins? Plugins always come from the MuseScore website. So MuseScore.org is where you get plugins from. All the plugins are in the download page. So if I go over to the MuseScore website right now, which, sure, why not? Let me do that. Got to remember where I just put the stuff that I wanted to show you here. I'm going to go to MuseScore.org, download plugins. These are all the plugins that are available for download, a lot more than what I actually have downloaded. When you download these, there's instructions on how to do it. It kind of varies by what operating system you're on. Some of these are just single files you download to that folder. Some of them are zip files you first have to unzip. So the details of that I did a whole session on plugins, and so you can try to watch that one, but I'll do more on plugins. But anyhow, once you have those plugins in that folder, now they're there. And now I can run some of these plugins. So for instance, there's a add courtesy accidentals plugin that I really, really love. I use it all the time. If I'm entering some notes, here, there's a D sharp, right? And on the way down, it's back to D natural because the bar line cancels it. But you're not supposed to depend on that. You're supposed to give people what's called a courtesy accidental. You put a natural sign there, even though technically it's not needed. So this plugin will do that. All I got to do is select what I want it to apply to, and then say plugins, accidentals, add courtesy accidentals. And it added that natural sign for me. It doesn't add naturals everywhere. It's just the next measure. And that's the normal way that courtesy accidentals work. I rely on that thing all the time. So there's all sorts of great plugins there. And that's a whole other topic. Again, I've got a whole other cafe episode on plugins. But I wanted, since that's a separate window, I wanted to show you. There it is. There's also the plugin creator. And this is for someone who wants to actually edit plugins, like write your own plugin. And it can be useful even if you're not actually interested in writing your own plugin, but you want to customize how one works. So I can then, from within here, open an existing plugin, and it shows me all these plugins that are there already in my plugins folder, and I can load one up, like this one that's Count Note Beats. This one actually displays, somehow I don't know what happened to it. It's just deciding to be slow for some reason. That plugin, I believe, was one Mirabilis put together, if I'm remembering correctly, that based on a cafe discussion here, where it would actually put in text above each note to say what beat it's on, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And then other people said, well, instead of that, I want syllables. I want ta and ti for on the beat, off the beat, or I want taka di mi for that system. It would be possible to just edit that plugin to make that possible. So so here it is. Here's that plugin here. And if I work my way through, I might make it bigger. I can hunt through as a programmer, look through this thing and kind of understand how it all works. And once I do that, I can find the magic lines to change where it's displaying the count and change it. So the plugin creator is for developers who want to actually work on plugins. So that's the plugins, the plugin creator menu. So if you've put them in the folder and they don't appear in Plugin Manager, probably it's because you haven't unzipped the file. Yeah, that's my best guess. Because if a plugin that's a zip file needs to be unzipped. So that's the most likely explanation. If you're seeing that not the case, it's unfortunately all these details, again, are operating system specific. So how it works on Windows is different than Linux and different than how it works on Mac as far as where these folders are. So the best thing you can do, if you've made sure you've unzipped the file and you've made sure it's for MuseScore 3, not for MuseScore 1 or 2, that it's an actual MuseScore 3 plugin, if you've made sure about all those things, maybe make a screen recording of yourself going through these steps and post it to the support forum, and maybe someone will be able to help you. But if it's an actual MuseScore 3 plugin and it's there in the correct folder, your plugins folder, not MuseScore's plugins folder, and you've unzipped it, it should show up in the plugin manager right away. But there are some plugins that have syntax errors in them. Those won't appear also. So there's a few plugins that are known to have errors in them that will cause them to not show up. So there is that also. But most plugins show up by default. All right. In the help menu, there's a couple of dialogues that might be useful. About, if you're ever wondering what version of MuseScore you have, help about tells you 3.6.2. The long number after that we don't care about. Just if it's the short numbers, 3.6.2. That's what we would want to know if you're ever asking for help on the support forum and someone says what version you have. Use help about and it tells you. There's also help about Qt. This isn't very useful to anyone, but it's a dialogue that Qt is a library we use that handles a lot of the display, handles a lot of things for us. In MuseScore 4, we're going to greatly reduce our reliance on Qt, which, by the way, officially is pronounced cute. But I really don't know people who use that pronunciation. We mostly say Qt. And so it tells you what version of Qt you're using. Not normally very useful, but anyhow, it's there. Also in the help menu is about Music XML, and that tells us what version of Music XML is being used. Not very useful to most people, but if you're curious about about Music XML and how it works. It's got some interesting links to Music XML info. So if you're exporting a file from MuseScore and then want to edit it and you want to learn more about how Music XML works, or if you're trying to import a Music XML file and you're getting errors and you need to learn how to fix them, then the information in here could possibly be useful to you. The other things that are actually in the help menu that is useful is the resource manager. And I say it's things because it's actually two separate things going on here. One are extensions. So there's the MuseScore high quality sound font that you can install, and there's the MuseScore drumline extension that you can install from here. Now, there is a known bug in this box where this will almost never work. If I try to install this, most likely it's going to give up. Unless it's able to succeed within 20 seconds, it's going to time out and say, sorry, I couldn't download it. So I'm going to let it try while I talk. But we know that the timeout is set too short. It wasn't, there was some reason they changed it. There it went. It said unable to download because it took too long. So unfortunately, what you'll have to do is if you want to actually download these extensions, you won't be able to use the extension manager. You'll have to download them manually by going to the MuseScore website and doing a search there to find where the files are. But in any case, that's what this dialog is for. But also in here is languages. So those of you whose native language is in English, you'll see MuseScore comes with all these different language translations, and you can update the language translations from here. So I'm using the English US, and apparently that at some point since I downloaded the program, an update became available. And if I click this update, it will download this, and it'll download the updates to the English translation. And that might fix a spelling error in a dialogue somewhere. So so if you're using another language, you can use that. And Graham, do all of them need unzipping? Well, if it's a zip file. If the file extension is .zip, then it needs to be unzipped. If the file extension is .qml, you're good to go. But if it doesn't show up in Plugin Manager, then it's because there's a syntax error in it somewhere that's causing it to not display. So then you'd use the plugin creator to fix the syntax error, and then it should show up. So that's that. And I think the duration editor is one that had a syntax error in one of its first versions. So we have now gone through all the menus and looked at all the windows and dialogues that show up as a result of that. But those aren't all the windows and dialogues that exist in MuseScore. There's a number of others. So I'm looking to see another thing here. So, Anne, you have a question about the final line of a score, and I'll quickly show that. So, by default, MuseScore tries to decide should that last system fill out or not based on how long it is. If it's close to filling it out, it'll fill it out. If it's not close to fill it out, it won't. What does it mean to be close? Well, that's just a style setting. You go to Format, Style. And then on the score tab here, you'll see, is it on this tab? No, it's on the next tab, page. Here you'll see last system fill threshold. This is what controls how far it has to be full before it decides to fill it the rest of the way. So set it to 100, it won't fill it at all. Set it to 0, it'll always fill it. So if I set this to 0, now that last system fills all the way, but at the default, it didn't fill it. So anyhow, that's that. So I will encourage people, if you have questions that don't relate to the topic, to hold them maybe for next week, or just ask on the support forum. I swear if you ask a question on the support forum, you'll usually have an answer within the hour. But on my next week's cafe is an Ask Me Anything session, and then all sorts of random questions are good. But for now, I'm going to try to keep on track so I can get through everything that I'm actually trying to get through here about actually talking about windows and dialogues. So the next thing I want to do is look at the palettes window here, because this is a window. It's always normally open unless you close it. And you can close it. You can use the X to close it. And then you can bring it back with View Palettes. You can also use the shortcut F9. F9 opens and closes it. And I can see now that I don't have my my keystroke thing going. So let me get that going. So you can see that indeed I pressed F9 to open and close the palettes. So the palette is a window, and of course we use this all the time to add things to our score. If I want to add a trill marking to that note, I select the note and then click the thing in the palette. That's how I use the palette. But there's a couple windows in here you might want to know about also. If I right click, or actually I don't even have to right click. If I click a palette here and then click the three dots there, you'll see palette properties here. Palette properties lets you rename that palette. Also pick how big the palette cells are, how tall they are, the scale, how big the elements within them are, and whether it shows the grid, all the vertical and horizontal lines, right, that divide that all up into table. If I unclick that, you'll see the grid goes away, right? So that's what palette properties does. You can also right-click any individual cell and then go to properties there, and this is where you can name that cell. So if you have a custom palette that you've created and you've added elements to it from your score, they show up with sort of a generic name by default. This is where you can give them an actual useful name. So for instance, I have a custom palette. Well, since a lot of you have never seen me create custom palettes, let me just do that real quick. What if I want to have text that says custom? I just, for whatever reason, that's words that I use a lot. I can open the text palette and then I can Control Shift drag that text, if I'm careful about it, into the palette. And there it is. Now it says custom, but it just says staff text. That's all it says, right? So I could then right click it and go to properties and rename it to say custom text. That would be more interesting if the word wasn't descriptive enough. The word custom is already descriptive enough there. But now when I hover over it, it actually says custom text. So if you're creating custom palettes like this, you can use that dialog to name the elements there. So that's something there in the palettes window. And I think there was one other thing I wanted to say about palettes. Was there palettes? Nope, that's it. All right. Now let's turn our attention to the inspector. The inspector is also normally open. I get the impression that a lot of people don't recognize how useful it is and close it and then forget that it was ever there. And then later on, we tell you to go to the inspector and you're like, what inspector? I would recommend keeping it around. I close mine all the time and then reopen it. And F8 is the shortcut for that. F8 closes it and then reopens it. So know about the inspector. If you don't want to remember the shortcut, it's in the View menu as well, View Inspector. So the inspector, if nothing is selected, will just tell you that nothing is selected. But if you select something, like a note, it shows you tons of options about that note that control how it displays, right, and how it plays back. So for instance, if I decide I want that note to be not visible, uncheck visible. And now you'll see it's kind of grayed out on screen. It won't print at all. I can also do things like make that note small. And notice, by the way, that made just the note small, but kept the stem full size. If I want to make the whole thing small, I come to the chord section. The stem is, if you think about a chord that has more than one note, the stem is what's in common between them all. So if you want, the stem is part of the chord as opposed to part of the note. So even if there's only one note there, the stem is considered part of the chord. So I go to the chord section of the inspector and click small, and now the entire chord, all the note heads as well as the stem, get small. So anyhow, the inspector has all of these settings to control all of these different things. But there's also a separate dialog within that you might want to know about, and that's the color dialog. By default, notes are black, right? And if I click a note, it turns blue. because that's the color that MuseScore uses to show that something's selected in voice 1. If we're in voice 2, it'll show a different color. But if I want to actually change the color of that note permanently, so it's not just blue while I've selected it, but I want it to really be a new color, I go to the color picker here, and you'll get a dialog that lets you pick a new color. This dialog looks different on every system, because this dialog is actually constructed by your operating system. It's actually constructed by Qt based on what it knows about your operating system. But your version of this probably won't look like my version of this, but it'll look similar, right? You'll have something that lets you pick colors, and it will hopefully look familiar. It should look like other color pickers in other programs that you might use. So one of the things, so if I want that note to be this color here, light green, I'll pick that and pick OK. And now you'll see there it says color. It's still blue in the score because it's selected, but as soon as I unselect it, now you see that light green color. There's another thing you should know about that, and this is something that a lot of people might find useful. I like to have text that has like a yellow background. I use it because I'm a teacher, right? And I create handouts and things, and I grade students' assignments, and I will often add comments like in red with a red pen with a yellow background, like a yellow highlighter. So let me do that and show you how that works. I'm going to select this text here that I called custom, and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to actually add a frame to it, and it says rectangle. So now there's a rectangle around the word custom, and I'm doing that so that I actually get the rectangle that I can color yellow, but I don't want to see the frame. So I'm actually going to change the border. Oh, actually the way I do this is I can set the border thickness to 0. And now I don't see the rectangle. It is there, but I don't see it. What I want to do, though, is make the background color be yellow. And I want to make it kind of transparent. So what I'm going to do is, and let me drag this onto the staff so you can kind of see what's going to happen here. I'm going to click where it says highlight color, and I'm going to pick yellow. But I'm going to go to what's called the alpha channel and change that. So first I'm going to show you what happens if I don't change it. It is invisible. That's because the normal color is completely transparent. So even though I changed it to yellow, you can't see it. This is almost every single color picker in the world has the same flaw. And I think as soon as you pick a color, it should change this alpha channel. But whatever, color pickers are color pickers, and MuseScore's role in the world isn't to change how color pickers work on operating systems. So if I change it to 255, that's the magic number, that's the max. If you didn't know that, try to use the arrow key in that spin box to make it any bigger, and you'll see it won't get any bigger. 255 is now completely opaque. Or I can pick a value in between there. I can pick 127, which is basically halfway in between there. And now you'll see it's kind of translucent yellow, and it kind of looks like a highlighter. So that's what I usually use. And then I can also come to the text itself and make it red. So now I have red text with a yellow highlighter behind it. That's what I normally use. And then I can come back and add this to my custom palette and maybe delete that other one. And it asks, do I want to delete it permanently? Sure, I want to delete it permanently. Because otherwise, if I didn't delete it permanently, then when I clicked more, I would have still seen it. So that's a little bit about palette customization. And I've done a whole session on customizations in general. I've talked about palette customization. So for more on that, you can hunt through the archives for the cafe and see more. But in any case, that color picker dialog is one that a lot of people don't really understand how to use. And I can't tell you all the intricacies of it because, again, it's different on every system. But I can tell you that alpha channel, it might be called transparency, or it might be called opacity, depends on your operating system and what it calls it. But alpha channel is the technical term for it, and it controls how transparent that color is. So there's a couple of other things that you can get to from the inspector here. Like if this is text, if this is staff text, you'll see a properties button. And this pops up the staff text properties window. And this is a place where you can do things like give that text some playback effect. So if I want that text to have the effect of changing the playback sound from, say, arco strings to pizzicato strings, now we already have that, right? We already have pizzicato and arco right there on the palette. But if we didn't, then you could use these settings in here to make that change. Right now, this score here is for piano. It doesn't have any arco or pizzicato. If I had any strings, though, we would see pizzicato and arco listed here. So this would be the dialogue you would use for that. It's also the dialogue you use to enable swing. If you want this text to turn on swing, then I can check that box and say, yes, I want 8th note swing at 60% swing. You could also make it be 16th note swing. You can change the ratio. And then if you want to create another text that says to make it go back to straight, you would set this to off here. So this is the dialogue where you change the playback effect. You'll see there's also a capo settings. And so you could also change that text to have the playback effect of capo 5, which will then make the playback 5 half steps different than the appearance of it. So in fact, I've never tried that, so it's time. So notice that this E here is a real E. This E here is written as an E, but my text is basically capo 5 because I set it that way in staff text properties. I got to staff text properties by clicking this text and then clicking properties in the inspector, which you might not have been able to see the button too well because my face might be covering it, but take my word for it. There's a button there that says properties, and then I went to capo settings and set it to 5. But you can also, that button in the inspector is relatively new. It got added like a release or two ago. The way you used to, and still can get to staff text properties, is right click the staff text, and then you'll see staff text properties. And that pops up the same dialogue. So gradually over time, it used to be there were a whole lot of things that were in right-click menus. We've gradually moved most of them elsewhere so that you don't have to right-click things to find those elements. Because a lot of people don't know about right-click, especially Mac users, because Macs don't typically use, Mac software typically doesn't use right-click, in part because Mac mice typically don't have 2 buttons. Control click is still the same as right click, or 2-finger tap on a touchpad still does the act of right clicking. But because Mac users are not used to ever having right buttons, most of the software doesn't take advantage of that. And so you're not aware of things like control click or 2-finger tap. But now I'm 2-finger tapping on this, and you see staff text properties. There are more things, though, that are in the right-click menus that are worth knowing about. So yeah, gradually we've taken things that used to only be in right-click menus and we've moved them. So like that one there, the staff text properties, you can get to from the inspector. Also, if I click a time signature, you'll see there's a properties button there that opens time signature properties dialog, which we've already kind of seen. This is how you can change that time signature to display, instead of displaying as 4/4, you could change it to say normal. No, actually you can't. I guess I thought I could type any old text I wanted in there, but I guess I can't. I guess I can really only type numbers and symbols that it knows about. But now it displays as 12/12. So whatever. You can change the properties of the time signature in there, and the beaming and all sorts of other stuff. So so that, yeah, used to be only in a right click. You could right click the time signature and see time signature properties, but now you can also get it by clicking and then just going to properties in the inspector. But there's 3 important dialogues that you can only get to by right-clicking. Jim, you're asking, is there an index in the archives? No, but what I'll tell you is, I will show you this since I just brought it up. Here's what I do. And I do this every week when I'm trying to scratch my brain to think about possible topics. I'm going to go to, this will be my view of my channel. But if I go to playlists MuseScore Café. So if you view my channel and then view the MuseScore Café playlist, you'll see something kind of like this. You won't see all the edit buttons. The layout of this will look different for you, but essentially you're going to see a list of everything. And when I scroll to the bottom, you'll see it didn't get all the way to the bottom because it's still loading things. So I keep doing that until it gets to the real bottom, which is my personal journey with MuseScore. That was my very first episode. Now that I know that they're all here, now I just use normal find on page. So Control F is the shortcut pretty much all browsers use to search for things. So then I can look for plugin. And there we go. There's my plugins thing. So that's what I do. I visit my own channel, view the Cafe playlist, make sure they're all loaded, and then use Control F to find on page. That is what I have to offer. Okay, so I want to show you the 3 dialogues that I can think of that are still only available in right-click. One of them is measure properties. If I right-click this measure and then say measure properties, and if you're British, it'll say bar properties, because bar in British is measure in English, in US English, I should say. Bar is kind of like slang in US English, like jazz and blues musicians will talk about 12-bar blues, but measure is the term that's usually used in US English, but bar is sort of the official term used in British English. So anyhow, this is where you can set things like to make one measure have an extra beat in it. That measure have 5 beats in it. This is where you can exclude a measure from the measure count, so that like a pickup measure, for instance, won't count. You can also set a measure to break a multi-measure rest. You can force a measure number to display. Like right now it says auto, but if I change this to always show, now you'll see a measure number on there. By default, if I undo that change, there's no measure number there, because normally we don't show a measure number on the first measure, but I forced it to always show. So anyhow, measure properties or bar properties are where those sorts of things are set. Another thing that's only in the right-click menu is if I right-click again, this time go to staff part properties. This is all sorts of options for that staff. So among other things, I can set them to have invisible staff lines. And if I hit apply now, you'll see the staff lines become invisible. Now they're still kind of grayed out on screen, but again, if I go to print this, you won't see the staff lines. And there's all sorts of other settings in here. The name of the staff, the actual instrument, right? If I want to change this from piano to some other instrument, don't just use the mixer to change the sound. Use this dialog to actually change the instrument. Then it will change the name for you, change the range, the transposition. It'll do all the right things for you. I could also say I don't want to show bar lines, which could be useful if I don't want to show the staff. And that actually made the bar lines just kind of disappear entirely. But if I now go to the view menu and say, don't show invisible items, now those invisible staff lines have disappeared also, right? So that could be useful for certain whatever purposes, educational purposes of making some sort of thing where you just want to show what notes look like without showing them on a staff. So Joanne, my own channel, on YouTube. This cafe is on YouTube. You are watching this on my channel. So if you are watching this, like if I go open an incognito thing so it doesn't know who I am, and I type YouTube Mastering MuseScore, even though I misspelled YouTube, it'll still find it for me. This is my channel. And then I can go to playlists. So this is what you guys would be seeing, right? You'll click playlists and then MuseScore Café. This cafe is on YouTube. You are pause. And so it's showing me, here's the list of all the previous episodes down here. So there's probably other ways of viewing the list, but that's what I just mean. This is my channel, me, Marc Sabatella, Mastering MuseScore. So if you go to my channel, then you will see all the cafe episodes listed. And there's probably some way to just see that list the way I did. I just don't really know how, because I don't, here's that same page there. So anyhow, fiddle around, you'll eventually find the list of all the cafe episodes. And if someone else wants to figure that out and post it to the community, great. I think I've got a link, though, in the community, actually. So actually, let me just do that. If I go to the community here, and then we go to MuseScore Café, and then I click where it says watch, and then I click here where it says previous episodes, and then view the playlist on YouTube, I think it takes me directly to that same window. Yes, it does. So there's how you get there. You go to My Community, and then Watch, and then you click where it said Previous Episodes, and it shows you the full list of all the previous episodes, and then just use Control F to find on page to look for any given topic. All right, so staff properties. There's a couple other dialogues I want to show you here that are in the right-click menu. One of them is split staff. Let me undo those changes right now because this looks too weird to me. If I enter some notes here, oh, I got to delete that capo because now that's bugging me. I don't have perfect pitch, but I know that wasn't a C. That's a C. If I enter some notes onto the piano staff here, and this is only on one staff, but I really want to split it into two staves for piano, I can right-click this and say split staff. And it pops up a very simple dialog that says, what do you want the split point to be? C4 is middle C. When I press OK, you're going to watch that staff is going to split into two staves, a treble and a bass staff, and everything above middle C will be on the top staff, everything below middle C will be on the bottom staff. You ready? OK, there it is. Now the first two C's are on the top staff, and that low C got moved down to the bottom staff. So that's what split staff does. Then there's another thing that Dave was asking about earlier, or not so much asking, but talking about, is the piano roll editor. If I right-click this staff here and then say piano roll editor, it shows this view that shows notes with these green bars and colored bars that is designed to look like the piano roll view in a sequencer. This is beyond way beyond what I want to talk about in more detail, but if this is something that you're like, oh yes, that's comfortable for me, I like piano rolls, that's how you get there. But the whole way that all this works, that's like an entire episode of the cafe unto itself, what all the different controls here do, what kind of edits you can do from within here. But yeah, it lets you control playback details, basically. So that's the piano roll editor. If I had a drum set staff, let me go ahead and add a drum set. I'm going to go to View, Edit Instruments. I think I left that one out before. Edit Instruments. This is where you would add another instrument to your score. And it looks just like the place where you select instruments when you first start your score. So I'm going to say percussion and say I want a drum set. So I now have a drum set in my score. And now I can add some notes to it, and there's the drum palette at the bottom of the screen, and A is the shortcut for snare drum. I've entered some snare drum notes into my score now, but what if I say, you know what, I don't want my snare to look like that. I want my snare to have a different note head. Well, I'm going to do that by right-clicking the staff and say Edit Drum Set. When I do that, I get this dialog that lets me control how I want things to look. I'm going to make this dialog a little bigger and scroll to where I see ideally I'd be able to drag the dividing bar here between the two halves of the dialog, but it doesn't seem like it wants me to do that. I just got to make the dialog wider still. So there it is, acoustic snare, shortcut A. And I can change it so that, first of all, it doesn't say acoustic snare, it just says snare. And then I can change the note heads. Instead of saying note head group normal, I can change it to cross. And now it's the cross here. And you can also make different note heads for quarter note versus half note. You can also change which voice you want it to be in, what staff line to be, etc. And when I press OK, now you'll see that my snare drums have X note heads. So if you want to be entering drum notation, but you don't want to use the standard notation that MuseScore uses a notation that most publishers use basically something very, very similar. But every publisher has their own quirky differences in how they notate for drum set. So if you're trying to emulate a particular publisher, or if you've got your own quirky notation, then that dialog right there, right click, edit drum set. This is where you'll customize how each individual drum is notated. And I lost the screen. Don't know how long that's been gone, but give me a moment and I will get it back. Select screen share. Back. Okay, so yeah, you didn't necessarily see everything about that, but I know you saw part of the thing with the drum set. Let me just do that one more time just to make sure. When I was talking about the edit drum set, this is where you would affect the note head. You can affect the default voice, what staff line it appears on, whether there's a shortcut for it, what stem direction you want. All of these things you define for each thing. That's how you could define how you want the tambourine to work, how you want the splash cymbal to work, how you want a side stick snare to work. This is how you define how all those things work. And again, there's an entire episode on drum notation. So, or I think 2 different episodes at least on drum notation. So you can hunt through the archives for that. So I think those were all the things that I could think about. Oh, no, there's one more very important thing to know about in the right-click menu, and that's select more. If I right-click this C here and then say select, you may have known there's all similar elements. That'll select all notes. If I do right-click and then select all similar elements, all notes are selected. Well, that's great, and sometimes that's useful. But what if you just want to select, say, all the Cs because you're doing something funny with your Cs? I don't know. Right-click a C, select more. And now you get this dialog with all these cool options in it. You could select all the ones with normal note heads, or just C5, or just the same note head, just the C. C5 is that particular octave of C. This will select all the Cs. And then maybe only the quarter notes, etc. All sorts of options that will appear here to let you select notes with particular properties. And the same with other things. You can select all text elements that have a particular style on them, or all hairpins that are in voice 2, all sorts of things like that you can use the right click this select more for. So when I do this, I've selected C and quarter note. So when I press OK, the only thing selected now are the C quarter notes. There's one C quarter note. Here's another C quarter note. Those got selected. Everything else isn't. So that select more dialog is often useful for certain types of things. So again, I right-click a note, right-click whatever note I want, like the E, and then select more. And it gets me there. All right. I think I have now covered almost everything that I wanted to cover. The only thing that I didn't cover is something that I know is a whole can of worms in itself and is another whole episode, but I'll at least show it to you. I'm going to open a MIDI file and then show you what you will see when you open a MIDI file. So I just used Control-O to open a file, and notice there's a drop down here, files of type. This is useful. Most operating systems have something similar. I want to tell it I only want MIDI files. And now I can browse around until I find a MIDI file to open. I know my test folder must have some. I don't know what this one is, but it's a MIDI file. There we go. When you open a MIDI file, you get this special window at the bottom of the screen that has a whole lot of options that let you control how that MIDI file got imported. It lets you control what sound is. First of all, the MIDI file has different tracks, and those tracks turn into staves in MuseScore. And this lets you control how that mapping works, which channel goes to which staff, what that staff is then called, what playback sound is used. Quantization. So, like if that MIDI file was recorded in real time, where you played it into a sequencer and your timing wasn't perfect, this is where you can tell MuseScore, round everything off to the nearest eighth note or whatever. You can also tell it, if you're overlapping notes a little bit and didn't intend to, this is where you can tell it, don't use multiple voices, and then it will chop off one note where the next note stopped, where the next note started, and not let them overlap, because that normally requires multiple voices. You can control whether it uses, whether MuseScore uses tuplets. You can control if it was a human performance, like as opposed to created by a sequencer, and you were speeding up and slowing down, this will allow MuseScore to attempt to follow that. It's artificial intelligence. It's not the most sophisticated algorithm in the world, but there are all these different options to control how MuseScore interprets your MIDI file when you import it. So again, that can be an entire episode unto itself at some point, how that works. All right. So the last thing that I want to do then is just address a little bit of Dave's question or comment about the timeline. I'm going to open the timeline window. And this particular score doesn't have a whole lot going on in it to make it worth using the timeline for. So I'm going to open a longer score of mine that does have interesting stuff going on. So this one here has a number of things going on. And so we can see that there's rehearsal letters here. And if I click a rehearsal letter, like rehearsal letter C, it takes me directly to rehearsal letter C. I can also see things like, I'm going to make this bigger because the default size of it, you can see the top part of it, but you can't see the bottom part. The bottom part are where all the instruments are. And this lets me see that, like right here, this part, the strings aren't playing. Here, in this part here, the strings are playing. Here they're not. Here they are. So I can click places and it takes me directly to that place. Now, Dave, you asked about other ways of jumping around. Like if there's any tempo changes or time signature changes, they will show up. This particular score doesn't have any. But if there had been any, they would have showed up. Also, same with key signature changes. This doesn't have any. It's atonal. But the rehearsal letters, the locations of the double bars. So, Dave, you asked specifically about jumping to particular places. Well, if it's a place you want to jump to, probably there's a reason you want to jump to there. That's what rehearsal marks are for. So that's not abusing rehearsal marks at all. If you want to be able to jump there in the timeline, then that's what a rehearsal mark is for. That's basically, you are rehearsing now. And if you printed this chart and gave it to musicians, there's a good chance that's the same place you're going to tell the musicians, hey, let's take it from that location. So yeah, just use a rehearsal mark. And if you add that rehearsal mark, Control M is the shortcut for rehearsal mark. You can say the spot I want to go back to. Call it what you want to call it. And then if for some reason you don't want musicians to know about that spot, you can, V, to make it invisible, and then it won't print. But even though it's invisible, it's still there in the timeline. So I can still go back to that spot. And then later on, if I'm now viewing some other spot in my score, letter T, I want to go back to that spot. There it is, the spot I want to go back to. And there I am. So yeah, the inspector is very useful because now I can do things like say, I want to go back to that spot. It's after letter A when the violin, it's like when the violins come in after letter B. So here's letter B, and then here's the spot where first violin comes in, or whatever. You can use, you have to spend a little time with the timeline to get used to how it all works. But you'll see it's actually a pretty powerful way of visualizing large scores in kind of logical ways that let you go to particular places. So yeah, when I work on large scores, I do use this, but I don't work on large scores that much. I tend to write small things. So we've looked at virtually everything there is to look at here, and hopefully you found some things useful along the way. So with that said, I'm going to bring back I'm going to close my timeline first. I'm going to bring back my play panel. There's not a shortcut for that by default, I don't think, but I've defined one, Control F10, and sometimes I have to press it twice before it works. So Control F10, and I'm going to use that to reduce the volume to a little lower, -50 instead of -40, so that I can talk over the playback. So I want to thank everyone for being here for the MuseScore Café today. Between last week and this week, we looked at pretty much every single dialogue there is within MuseScore. If I missed something, feel free to point it out, and I'll show it next week's Cafe. Next week will be the Ask Me Anything session, so get your questions ready. If they require me to look at your score, then post it to the community. Just go to the community, the conversation space under MuseScore Café. In fact, I'll just show you that spot right now. If you go to the community and where it says MuseScore Café Conversation, this is where you can actually post things now. So, so Dave, you're asking about extensions, and I think that you're probably going to see the exact same thing that I saw. The timeout is just too short, and that's unless you have a super fast internet connection, it ain't going to work. Anyhow, this is the place where you can post your score for me to then be able to answer it next week. So next week is Ask Me Anything because it's the first Wednesday of the month. That's always the case. Also, while you're here, give me suggestions for other topics. I love to hear topics from you of things you want me to be talking about in these cafe sessions. So hope you've all gotten something out of this, and I will hopefully also see you tomorrow back here in the community for the Music Masterclass. And if not, then for the cafe, whenever I see